The immense central dome of Zaref Prime glittered like an artificial nebula against the backdrop of endless space. Its transparent panels, reinforced with quantum-stabilized graphene, offered breathtaking views of the galaxy's spiral arm stretching into infinity. It was here, at the nexus of 17 major trade routes, that the Galactic Commerce Alliance would convene for its Centennial Summit, an event that promised to reshape economic policy across 12 sectors. Security Director Arlek stood at the viewport of his command center, hands clasped behind his back, his thin frame silhouetted against the starscape. His elongated features, characteristic of those born in the low-gravity environments of the outer colonies, seemed particularly sharp today. His skin had the pallid quality common to station dwellers, who rarely felt natural sunlight on their faces. Yet it was his eyes that commanded attention, cold, calculating, with the faint glow of neural augmentation pulsing beneath the irises. "Status report on the Gorgath integration," he demanded without turning. His second-in-command, a Proximan, with skin the color of burnished copper, glanced nervously at the datapad. "The biological has been successfully transferred from containment. Final neural restraint calibration is complete. The contract has been signed with, well, what passes for its signature." Arlek allowed himself a thin smile. "Excellent. Bring it in." The command center doors parted with a whisper, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Even Arlek, not given to emotional displays, felt a primitive shiver travel up his spine as Gorgath entered. The apex predator moved with a fluidity that belied its massive frame. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, its exoskeleton gleamed with an iridescent black sheen that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the room's light. Multiple limbs, some ending in gripping appendages, others in what could only be described as natural weapons, shifted and adjusted with each step. Its sensory apparatus, a crown of oscillating antennae and compound eyes, swiveled independently, taking in every detail of the room. Most unnerving of all was its face, if such a term could be applied. Behind a complex mandibular structure lay what evolutionary biologists had determined to be a mouth lined with row upon row of serrated teeth, designed not merely to kill, but to inflict maximum pain in the process. It was a face evolved for one purpose, to be the last thing its prey ever saw. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Arlek said, finally turning to face his staff. "The Gorgath species has never been successfully captured alive before. This specimen was bred in isolation on Nexus 9, using genetic material recovered from a deceased hunter. It cost more than this station's annual security budget, but I assure you, the investment will prove worthwhile." The Proximan shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the risk assessment is irrelevant," Arlek cut him off. "The neural restraints ensure complete compliance. It understands that the contract is binding and that violation means immediate termination via the cortical implant. Besides," he added with a cold smile, "its species values contracts with almost religious reverence. It's a predator, yes, but an honorable one." Gorgath remained motionless, its breathing barely perceptible. Only its sensory crown continued to move, sweeping the room methodically. Arlek approached the creature, displaying none of the fear that had his staff edging toward the exits. "You understand your assignment?" The voice that emanated from Gorgath was unnaturally deep, seeming to resonate from somewhere beyond its physical form. The translation matrix embedded in its neural restraint converted the complex series of clicks and subsonic vibrations into standard galactic. "I serve as your shield and weapon until the contract's termination. All threats to your person are to be neutralized with extreme prejudice. Your enemies are my prey." "Precisely," Arlek nodded, satisfaction evident in his voice. "The Commerce Summit begins in 12 standard hours. Over 400 delegations will be arriving, each with their own security teams and agendas." He walked a slow circle around Gorgath, examining his new acquisition. "Many will attempt to use the summit to disadvantage my station, my investments. You will ensure that does not happen." Gorgath's sensory crown shifted slightly in acknowledgement. "The terms are understood. Then, Let's make one thing clear. Arlek stopped looking directly into the creature's compound eyes. You are not here as a diplomat. You are here as a message. When delegates see you at my side, I want them to understand the consequences of pushing too hard against my interests. Fear as leverage, Gorgath observed with no inflection to indicate approval or disapproval. Efficient. Arlek's smile widened. I believe we understand each other perfectly. As the security team dispersed to their stations, Arlek turned back to the viewport, satisfaction evident in his posture. Behind him, Gorgath remained perfectly still, a living weapon awaiting deployment. Neither of them could have predicted how dramatically their arrangement would change once the Earth Alliance delegation arrived. The central concourse of Zeref Prime bustled with activity as the delegations began to arrive. Representatives from across the galaxy moved through the space, their diverse physiologies and cultural presentations, creating a tapestry of interstellar diplomacy. Crystalline beings from the Aldebaran system floated in specialized gravity fields. Methane breathers from Tau Ceti's outer moons wore environmental suits that hissed softly with each step. Humanoid species of various evolutionary branches conversed in a cacophony of languages, their translator units working overtime to facilitate communication. Security Director Arlek stood at the primary greeting dais Gorgath, a looming presence beside him. The effect was immediate and precisely as intended. Conversations faltered as delegations approached. Eyes, optical sensors, and various sensory apparatuses darted nervously toward the apex predator. Formal greetings became hurried. Diplomatic pleasantries were abbreviated. The Hadarian Collective sends greetings, murmured a representative, with translucent skin through which complex organ systems could be seen pulsing. Their eyes never left Gorgath. We trust negotiations will be equitable. Zeref Prime values fairness above all else. Arlek replied smoothly, the platitude sliding easily from his lips. We look forward to discussing the proposed tariff adjustments in the neutral zones. As the Hadarian delegation hurried away, Arlek's adjutant leaned in. Sir, perhaps Gorgath's presence is causing undue anxiety among our guests. The Verandi delegation has already filed a formal protest. Arlek waved a dismissive hand. Let them protest. By the time they navigate the bureaucratic channels, the summit will be over, and I'll have secured favorable terms for our consortium. Fear is a powerful motivator for compromise, especially when time is limited. A soft chime interrupted their conversation, the arrival notification for another delegation. Arlek glanced at his datapad and frowned. The Earth Alliance, he muttered. They weren't expected for another 6 hours. Their transmission indicates they made better time through the Cygnus corridor than anticipated, the adjutant reported. Arlek's expression darkened. The Earth Alliance has been pushing for regulatory oversight of independent trading stations. They claim humanitarian concerns while attempting to extend their jurisdiction beyond their legal boundaries. He turned to Gorgath. Pay special attention to these ones. They're dangerous not because of their strength, but because of their ideas. Gorgath's sensory crown adjusted, focusing toward the arrival gate. Clarify threat parameters. They don't present an immediate physical threat, Arlek admitted. But their diplomatic position threatens everything we've built here. I want them to feel uncomfortable during their stay. Nothing that violates the summit's security protocols, of course, but make your presence known. The docking bay doors slid open, and the Earth Alliance delegation emerged. They were fewer in number than most delegations, just 5 individuals dressed in simple but elegantly tailored suits of navy blue. Unlike many of the other representatives, they carried no visible weapons or defensive technology. They moved with the easy confidence of those accustomed to gravity environments, their postures relaxed yet dignified. At their head walked a woman of average height with short black hair streaked with silver at the temples. Her features reflected Earth's genetic diversity, the legacy of centuries of global integration. Her eyes, dark and alert, scanned the concourse methodically, taking in details with professional precision. Ambassador Avery Kwan. Arlec's adjutant, supplied quietly. Former military intelligence, now Earth's chief negotiator for extraterrestrial affairs. The others are her advisory team, legal counsel, economic specialists, and cultural attachés. Arlec nodded, plastering a diplomatic smile on his face as the Earth delegation approached. Ambassador Kwan, welcome to Zeref Prime. We weren't expecting you quite so soon. Avery Kwan extended her hand in the human custom of greeting. Director Arlec, thank you for your hospitality. We found the Cygnus route remarkably clear. It seems your station's gravitational influence has stabilized the usual disturbances. Arlec accepted the handshake, noting the firm grip. Our engineers work tirelessly to ensure safe passage for all our visitors. He gestured to the massive form beside him. Allow me to introduce Gorgath, my personal security consultant, for the duration of the summit. Kwan's eyes shifted to the towering predator. If she felt any fear, she showed no sign of it. Instead, her gaze was evaluating, curious even. Interesting choice, she said evenly. I believe this is the first time a Gorgath has been documented outside of their home system. Or perhaps I should say the first time one has been employed. Something in her tone caused Arlec's smile to tighten. Zeref Prime has always been at the forefront of interspecies cooperation. Indeed, Kwan replied, her expression neutral. We look forward to discussing how such cooperation might be standardized across all trading hubs. As the small group of humans prepared to move past, something unexpected happened. Gorgath, who had remained perfectly still throughout all previous introductions, suddenly shifted position. Its sensory crown extended, fully focusing intently on Ambassador Kwan. A low, resonant sound emerged from somewhere within its thoracic cavity, not a growl, but something more complex. Arlec tensed, momentarily concerned that the neural restraints had malfunctioned. But Gorgath made no aggressive move. Instead, it seemed to be studying the humans with an intensity it hadn't displayed toward any other delegation. Is there a problem? Kwan asked, still showing no sign of discomfort, despite being the focus of the apex predator's attention. Not at all, Arlec assured her quickly. Gorgath is simply performing its security assessment. Kwan nodded, once then, looked directly at Gorgath. We understand duty, she said, addressing the creature directly. We respect it even when we don't share the same priorities. For a long moment, Gorgath remained fixed on her, its compound eyes reflecting Kwan's image in countless, fragmented repetitions. Then, with a movement almost too subtle to notice its sensory crown, dipped in what might have been acknowledgement. As the Earth delegation moved away, Arlec frowned. What was that? Gorgath's reply was characteristically terse. Threat assessment complete. And the predator turned its attention back to the concourse, scanning the crowd. The human presents an anomaly. Further observation required. Arlec wanted to press for clarification, but the arrival chime sounded again, announcing another delegation. He made a mental note to investigate this anomaly later. For now, there were more immediate concerns, namely ensuring that the summit's power dynamics tilted in his favor. Little did he know that the brief interaction between Gorgath and Ambassador Kwan had set in motion events that would upend not just the summit, but the very foundation of his carefully constructed authority. The preliminary negotiations had been underway for 6 hours, and already the strain was beginning to show on the delegates' faces. The Grand Assembly Hall, with its tiered seating, arranged in a perfect circle, hummed with the low murmur of multiple simultaneous conversations. Holographic displays flickered above the central dais, showing market projections, resource allocations, and proposed regulatory frameworks. The air was thick with tension, ambition, and the competing sense of dozens of species. Security Director Arlec moved through the room with practiced ease, Gorgath a shadow at his back. The strategy was working perfectly. At each negotiating table he visited, the discussion mysteriously shifted in his favor the moment the apex predator loomed into view. Trade representatives, who had been firm in their positions, suddenly discovered room for compromise. Demands for regulatory oversight were softened to mere suggestions. The Orion Cooperative has reconsidered their position on the neurostim export restrictions. His adjutant reported quietly as they moved between tables. They're willing to accept a 40% tariff reduction instead of the 60% they were demanding. Arlek nodded satisfaction evident in his thin smile. And the Vega Consortium? Still resistant, but I believe another visit might change their minds. Make it happen, Arlek instructed. His gaze drifted across the hall to where the Earth Alliance delegation sat. Unlike the others, they had maintained a consistent position throughout the day, neither escalating their demands nor yielding ground. Ambassador Quan was currently engaged in what appeared to be an intense but cordial discussion with representatives from 3 different systems. "What about our Earth friends?" Arlek asked. "Have they been sufficiently impressed by our security arrangements?" The adjutant hesitated. "They haven't submitted any formal complaints, unlike some delegations. But they haven't altered their position on independent station oversight either." Arlek's expression hardened. "Then perhaps they need a more personal demonstration. Let's pay them a visit." As they approached the Earth delegation's table, Arlek noticed something curious. Gorgath, normally in perfect step behind him, had slowed its pace. Its sensory crown was fully extended, sweeping in a manner that seemed almost agitated. "Something wrong," Arlek murmured. "Multiple anomalies detected," Gorgath responded, its deep voice pitched too low for others to hear. "Atmospheric composition variance. Micro-fluctuations in the station's gravitational field. Possible security breach in progress." Arlek frowned. "Are you certain our systems haven't reported anything?" "Your systems are inadequate," Gorgath stated flatly. Its compound eyes swiveled independently, scanning different sections of the hall. "Recommend immediate security protocol elevation." Before Arlek could respond, they reached the Earth delegation's table. Ambassador Quan looked up from her discussion, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. "Director Arlek," she acknowledged with a polite nod. "Is there something we can help you with?" "Just checking in, Ambassador," Arlek replied smoothly. "I want to ensure that all our guests are finding the accommodations satisfactory." "Quite satisfactory," Quan assured him. "Though we're more concerned with the progress of these negotiations. There seems to be an unusual pattern of concessions occurring throughout the hall today." The implication was clear, and Arlek felt a flicker of irritation. The summit often produces unexpected compromises. It's the nature of productive diplomacy. "Indeed," Quan agreed, her gaze shifting briefly to Gorgath. "Though one might question whether intimidation qualifies as diplomacy." Arlek's smile became brittle. "I assure you, Ambassador Zaref Prime respects the sovereignty and dignity of all delegations. Gorgath's presence is merely a security precaution in these uncertain times." "Of course," Quan replied, her tone neutral. "We all take the security of our representatives seriously." She gestured to her own team, none of whom displayed any obvious defensive capabilities. "Though our approaches differ somewhat." The conversation was interrupted as one of Quan's advisors leaned in to whisper something in her ear. Her expression remained unchanged, but something in her posture shifted subtly, a barely perceptible increase in alertness. "If you'll excuse us, Director," she said, rising from her seat. "There's a matter that requires our attention." As the Earth delegation prepared to leave the table, Gorgath suddenly moved. With startling speed for something so large, it positioned itself between Ambassador Quan and the exit path. "Threat detected," it announced loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Remain in place." The hall fell silent, all eyes turning toward the confrontation. Arlek felt a surge of alarm. This was not part of the plan. Public aggression toward delegates violated summit protocols. "Gorgath," he hissed, "stand down immediately." But the Predator did not move. Its attention was fixed on something across the hall, a service entrance where a maintenance worker was adjusting what appeared to be an atmospheric regulator. "Director," Quan said calmly, I suggest you have your security consultant step aside. Arlek was about to issue another command when Gorgath spoke again, this time in a tone that sent chills through everyone who heard it. Assassination attempt in progress. Neural disruptors detected. Target lock shifting. In the split second that followed, several things happened at once. The maintenance worker, across the hall, reached into their toolkit. Gorgath's exoskeleton shifted plates, realigning into what appeared to be a defensive configuration. And most shockingly of all, the apex predator moved not to protect Arlek, but to shield Ambassador Quan. A high-pitched whine filled the air as a neural disruptor was activated. Delegates scattered in panic. Security personnel rushed toward the source of the threat. And in the midst of the chaos, Gorgath wrapped its massive form around the Earth delegation, using its armored exoskeleton as a living shield. Arlek stood frozen in disbelief. "What are you doing?" he shouted at Gorgath. "Protect me, that's the contract!" The Predator's response was lost in the chaos, as more disguised attackers revealed themselves throughout the hall. What had been a diplomatic summit was rapidly descending into a coordinated assault. And at the center of it all, the galaxy's most feared apex predator had just switched sides. The emergency containment field snapped into place with a crackling hum, separating the Grand Assembly Hall into isolated sectors. Alarm klaxons wailed their piercing tone, adding to the chaos as delegates and security personnel scrambled for cover. Through it all, Security Director Arlek stood rigid with fury, watching as his carefully orchestrated summit collapsed into disorder. "Override the neural restraints," he snapped at his adjutant. "Authorization Arlek Prime, Theta 9. The Proximan's copper fingers flew across the control pad. "Attempting override, sir, but—" He paused, confusion evident in his voice. "Something's blocking the signal. The restraint system is acknowledging the command but not executing." Arlek snatched the pad from his hands, verifying the failure himself. His eyes narrowed as he looked across the hall, to where Gorgath had created a protective perimeter around the Earth Alliance delegation. The apex predator moved with fluid precision, its natural weapons extended, intercepting attacks from multiple directions. "Impossible," Arlek muttered. "The contract is binding. It can't just choose another master." A barrage of neural disruptor fire illuminated the hall in strobing blue light. The weapons designed to incapacitate without leaving physical evidence were favored by professional assassins throughout the sector. 3 attackers had converged on the Earth delegation's position, their cover as maintenance workers and service staff, now abandoned. Ambassador Quan and her team had taken defensive positions behind Gorgath, their calm efficiency suggesting training beyond standard diplomatic protocols. Quan herself had produced a small device from her jacket, not a weapon, but some kind of scanner that she was using to assess the tactical situation. Talon Squad. Arlek's security chief reported examining sensor readings from across the hall. Mercenary unit specializes in high-profile extractions and eliminations. Someone's invested significant resources in this attack. Arlek's expression darkened. "Get our security teams in there. I want the Earth delegation secured and isolated for questioning." "Sir," the security chief looked uncertain. "They appear to be the targets, not the instigators." "That remains to be determined," Arlek replied coldly. "And what about Gorgath? It's violated its contract. Initiate termination protocols." Before the command could be executed, a new development unfolded across the hall. Gorgath had moved from defensive to offensive operations, surging forward with terrifying speed toward the nearest attacker. The mercenary fired repeatedly neural pulses, glancing off the predator's exoskeleton, with minimal effect. In a blur of motion too fast for most eyes to follow, Gorgath subdued the attacker, disarming them with precise application of its natural weapons. Rather than killing the mercenary, however, it secured them in place, using a secreted resin to immobilize their limbs. The message was clear. This was not a mindless beast acting on instinct, but a sentient being making calculated choices. Fascinating, murmured a Verandi scientist who had taken shelter near Arlec's position. It appears to be employing non-lethal restraint techniques, consistent with Earth Alliance security protocols. The cognitive adaptation required for such behavior modification is remarkable. Arlec shot the scientist a withering glare. Your academic observations are not helpful at this moment. Across the hall, Ambassador Kwan had made contact with the station's central security systems. The main view screen flickered to life, displaying her face to all sectors of the divided hall. "Attention all delegates and station personnel." Her voice came through clear and authoritative. "This appears to be a coordinated attack against multiple delegations. We have reason to believe the neural disruptors are merely the first phase, with possible explosive devices planted throughout the summit venue." Arlec stepped forward, his own communication device activating. "This is Security Director Arlec. The situation is under control. All delegates should remain in their current positions until my security teams have secured each sector." Kwan's expression remained impassive. "Director, with respect, our intelligence suggests this attack was orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of Zeref Prime's security protocols. Until we can verify that your command structure hasn't been compromised, I recommend all delegations implement their independent security measures." A ripple of conversation spread through the hall as delegates processed this thinly veiled accusation. Arlec felt control of the situation slipping away. "That's an outrageous suggestion," he countered. "Ambassador Kwan appears to be using this unfortunate incident to advance the Earth Alliance's agenda of imposing external oversight on independent stations. I remind all delegations that under galactic commerce protocols, I remain the supreme security authority on Zeref Prime." The debate was interrupted as another section of mercenaries breached a secondary entrance. Unlike the first wave, these attackers wore full tactical gear, their faces concealed behind reflective visors. They moved with the synchronized precision of military-trained operatives. "Talon Squad Elite Units," the security chief identified. "They don't usually commit these resources unless the contract is high value." Gorgath, having secured the immediate area around the Earth delegation, turned its attention to the new threat. What followed was a display of combat prowess that few in the hall had ever witnessed. The apex predator moved like liquid shadow, its multiple limbs striking with surgical precision. Neural disruptor fire ricocheted harmlessly off its reinforced carapace. What was most remarkable, however, was the clear protective intent behind Gorgath's actions. It was not simply attacking threats, it was creating evacuation corridors, prioritizing delegate safety, and systematically neutralizing the attackers without lethal force where possible. Ambassador Kwan used the opportunity to address the hall again. "All diplomatic personnel, please proceed to Emergency Evacuation Point Delta. Earth Alliance security coordinators are transmitting safe passage routes to your communication systems now." "Belay that order," Arlec shouted, but the chaos had already taken on a momentum of its own. Delegates were moving, following the evacuation routes, appearing on their personal devices. In desperation, Arlec activated his direct communication link to Gorgath. "This is a direct order," he said, his voice hard. "Return to my position immediately. You are in violation of your contract." For a moment, Gorgath paused in its combat operations. Its sensory crown swiveled toward Arlec compound eyes, reflecting the emergency lights. "The contract has been superseded," it replied, its deep voice echoing through the hall. "Threat assessment parameters have been recalibrated based on new primary directives." "What new directives?" Arlec demanded. "I gave you no such authorization." Gorgath's response was simple and devastating. "Authorization not required. The human demonstrated alpha predator qualities that align with superior survival protocols. Your leadership has been classified as detrimental to optimal outcomes. Contract transfer initiated." With that declaration, Gorgath returned to its protective duties, leaving Arlec stunned and humiliated before the assembled delegates of the galaxy. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone in the hall knew it. In the secure operations center, deep within Zaref Prime, emergency protocols had transformed the normally orderly space into a hive of frantic activity. Holographic displays showed the status of each sector, with red indicators blinking ominously where Talon Squad mercenaries had established control. Security personnel rushed between stations, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of crisis management. Security Director Arlek stood at the central command console, his expression thunderous. "I want a full lockdown of all diplomatic quarters," he ordered. "No one leaves their assigned areas without direct authorization from my office. And find me whoever is jamming the neural restraint signals." His adjutant approached cautiously. "Sir, we've lost access to the station's main security grid. Someone has implemented override protocols that we can't bypass." "That's impossible," Arlek snapped. "Only I have that level of authorization." "It appears the Earth Alliance had contingency plans in place," the adjutant replied, choosing his words carefully. "Their security protocols have integrated with our systems at a fundamental level. They're not so much overriding our controls as supplementing them." Arlek's eyes narrowed. "They came prepared for this. They knew." He slammed his fist against the console. "Get me a direct line to Ambassador Quan, now." While the communications officer scrambled to comply, Arlek turned to his security chief. "What's the status of our asset?" The chief's expression was grim. "Gorgath continues to protect the Earth delegation. It's escorted them to the secondary conference chamber in the diplomatic wing. We've attempted to deploy Talon Squad's elite units to intercept, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" Arlek demanded. "The results were not favorable to our contractors. Gorgath appears to have adapted to their tactical patterns. It's anticipating their movements with uncanny precision." A junior officer approached with a datapad. "Sir, we've analyzed the neural restraint failure. It appears the system is still functional, but Gorgath has somehow reprioritized its programming. The restraints are still active, but they're responding to a different set of behavioral parameters." Arlek snatched the pad, scanning the technical readout with growing fury. "This is sabotage. The Earth Alliance must have had access to the restraint specifications before they arrived." "Actually, sir," the officer continued nervously, "the analysis suggests something else entirely. The restraints haven't been hacked or reprogrammed. They're functioning exactly as designed. But Gorgath itself has somehow reinterpreted the underlying contract logic." "That's not possible," Arlek insisted. "The contract is binding. The neural pathways were mapped precisely to ensure compliance." "With respect, Director," the station's chief xenobiologist interjected, "having been summoned to the operations center during the crisis, we may have fundamentally misunderstood Gorgath physiology. Its neural structure is unlike anything we've documented before. The restraints were designed based on theoretical models, not empirical data." "What are you saying?" Arlek demanded. "I'm saying," the xenobiologist replied carefully, "that Gorgath may have always had the ability to reassess its contracts based on some internal criteria we don't understand. The restraints ensured it would honor a contract, but not necessarily with you, if it found a more compelling employer." The communications officer interrupted. "Sir, we have Ambassador Quan on Secure Channel 3. Arlek composed himself, straightening his uniform before activating the channel. The holographic display flickered to life, showing Quan in the secondary conference chamber. Behind her, several delegates from other systems were visible, being tended to by Earth Alliance medical personnel. And standing vigilant near the entrance was Gorgath, its massive form somehow looking even more formidable than before. Director Arlek Quan acknowledged her tone professionally neutral despite the circumstances. "I trust you're secure," Ambassador Arlek replied, not bothering to hide his anger. "You will explain immediately how you compromised my security asset and return control of my station systems, or I will be forced to treat this as an act of aggression by the Earth Alliance." Quan's expression remained impassive. "Director, I understand you're under considerable stress, but your accusations are misplaced. We did not compromise Gorgath. We did not hack your security systems. What you're witnessing is something much simpler, yet apparently beyond your comprehension. And what might that be? Arlek asked, through clenched teeth. Choice, Quan replied. Gorgath made a choice when it recognized something in our delegation that resonated with its own nature. As for your security systems, they're responding to the command protocols that all GCA member stations are required to implement, the very oversight you've been so resistant to. This is a sovereign station, Arlek insisted. You have no authority. The Galactic Commerce Alliance Charter Section, 19, Paragraph 4. Quan interrupted smoothly. In the event of a security failure that endangers multiple diplomatic delegations, any member state may implement emergency protocols to safeguard representatives until the crisis is resolved. We're not taking control of Zeref Prime Director. We're simply ensuring the safety of the summit attendees. Arlek's face flushed with anger. And Gorgath, will you claim its defection is also covered by some obscure regulatory clause? For the first time, Quan's expression softened slightly. Gorgath made its own decision. Perhaps you should ask yourself why an apex predator, supposedly bound by contract to serve you, would choose to protect us instead. Before Arlek could respond, alarms blared throughout the operations center. The security chief rushed to a monitoring station. Sir, we've got multiple breaches in the outer habitation ring. More Talon Squad units, at least 30 operators heavily armed. They're bypassing our containment fields using station security codes. Arlek felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He hadn't authorized any additional mercenary deployments. If they were using valid security codes. Quan's voice cut through his thoughts. It appears your contractors have decided to escalate Director. Perhaps they're not serving your interests as faithfully as you believed. The implication was clear, and for the first time Arlek felt a flicker of doubt. Had he been set up? Was he being positioned to take the fall for an attack that someone else had orchestrated? We need to coordinate our response, Quan continued, her tone shifting to one of professional urgency. Whatever disagreements exist between us, I think we can both agree that allowing armed mercenaries to overrun a diplomatic summit is not in anyone's interest. Arlek hesitated, years of suspicion and self-interest, warring with the practical reality of the situation. Finally, pragmatism won out. What do you propose, Ambassador? A temporary joint security command, Quan replied without hesitation. Your station personnel have the local knowledge we need. Our team has the tactical experience and resources to counter this level of threat. Together, we might stand a chance of resolving this without further casualties. Arlek glanced around the operations center, seeing the fear and uncertainty on his staff's faces. His authority was already compromised. If he refused cooperation now, he would lose what little control he had left. Agreed, he said reluctantly. But this changes nothing about our position on regulatory oversight. Quan's slight smile suggested she understood the political dance all too well. Of course not, Director. This is merely a practical response to an immediate crisis. As the communication ended, Arlek turned to find his adjutant staring at him with barely concealed shock. Sir, are we really going to cooperate with them? Arlek's expression was grim. For now. But once this crisis is contained, there will be a reckoning. His gaze drifted to the security feed, showing Gorgath standing protectively near the Earth delegation. For everyone involved. The secondary conference chamber had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Holographic displays showing station schematics hovered above the central table, with red indicators marking confirmed Talon Squad positions. Earth Alliance security specialists worked alongside Zeref Prime personnel, the earlier animosity temporarily set aside in the face of a common threat. Ambassador Quan stood at the center of the activity, her calm demeanor a steadying influence on those around her. The mercenaries are converging on the diplomatic quarter, she observed, studying the tactical display. Their primary objective appears to be capturing or eliminating key delegates. A Zeref Prime security officer nodded in agreement. They've disabled 3 of our auxiliary power nodes. If they take out 2 more, they can force a station-wide system reset, which would disable all security protocols for approximately 7 minutes, Quan finished. More than enough time to complete their mission. She turned to the gathered delegates, who had taken refuge in the chamber. I need to be clear, this is no longer just an assassination attempt. This is a coordinated effort to destabilize the entire Galactic Commerce Alliance. Murmurs of alarm spread through the room. A Hadarian representative stepped forward, their translucent skin pulsing with agitation. Who would benefit from such chaos? Surely not Director Arlek? Quan chose her words carefully. I believe Director Arlek may have unwittingly become a pawn in someone else's game. The timing, the resources deployed. This operation was planned well in advance of the summit. At the perimeter of the room, Gorgath remained vigilant, its compound eyes constantly scanning for threats. Its sensory crown extended, fully rotating in a slow, deliberate pattern that suggested it was detecting something beyond normal security parameters. Quan noticed the predator's behavior. Gorgath, what are you sensing? The apex predator's deep voice resonated through the chamber. Subsonic communications, encrypted tactical data. The hunters are coordinating on frequencies designed to bypass standard detection. Can you intercept? Quan asked. Interception in progress. Decryption will require time. An Earth Alliance security specialist approached Quan. Ambassador, we've established a secure link with Director Arlek's team. They're requesting coordination on the counteroffensive. Quan nodded. Tell them we're preparing to move. Our priority is securing the delegates and protecting the station's critical infrastructure. She turned to her chief security officer. Commander Walsh, assemble a team. We need to reach the central power distribution node before Talon Squad disables it. What about us? Asked a nervous-looking delegate from the Vega Consortium. You'll remain here under protection, Quan assured them. This chamber has independent life support and security systems. It's the safest place on the station right now. As the Earth Alliance team prepared for deployment, Quan approached Gorgath. The apex predator towered over her, its massive form seeming to absorb the light around it. You didn't have to protect us, she said quietly. Your contract was with Director Arlek. Gorgath's sensory crown shifted, focusing on her. The contract became invalid when superior survival parameters were identified. Your species demonstrates anomalous characteristics that align with optimal evolutionary strategies. Quan raised an eyebrow, meaning humans are not apex predators in physical capability. Gorgath explained, its deep voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. Yet you function as apex influencers in your ecosystem. You establish dominance not through fear or physical superiority, but through cooperation and strategic thinking. This is efficient, worthy of protection. A small smile touched Quan's lips. I think that's the closest thing to a compliment I've received during this summit. The moment was interrupted as Commander Walsh approached. Team's ready, Ambassador. But there's a complication. He gestured to a section of the station schematic. Talon Squad has established a blockade here between us and the power distribution node. They've got neural disruptors and pulse cannons. Even with our tactical gear, it's going to be a bloodbath if we try to push through. Quan studied the display, her expression thoughtful. We need a diversion. Something that will draw their attention long enough for a small team to slip past. I will go, Gorgath stated the declaration, silencing all conversation in the room. The mercenaries fear me. This fear can be leveraged. Walsh looked skeptical. With all due respect to your abilities, even you can't take on that many heavily armed operators alone. Gorgath's mandibles shifted in what might have been the predator equivalent of a dismissive gesture. Incorrect. The neural disruptors were calibrated for humanoid nervous systems. Their effect on my physiology is minimal. The pulse cannons are more problematic but avoidable if approach vectors are properly calculated. Quan looked up at the towering creature. Why would you risk yourself for us? You have no obligation to the Earth Alliance or any of these delegates. Gorgath's compound eyes reflected her image in countless facets. The contract I honor is not written on documents. It is the unspoken agreement between sentient beings to protect that which advances all life. Your approach to survival aligns with this principle. Director Arlex does not. A profound silence fell over the room as delegates and security personnel alike processed the philosophical depth of the Predator's statement. "Well," Walsh said, finally breaking the tension, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad we've got a 3-meter-tall killing machine on our philosophical side." Quan nodded, her decision made. "All right. Gorgath will create the diversion. Commander, assemble a small strike team, no more than 4 operators. Your objective is to reach the power distribution node and secure it against further sabotage." As the final preparations were made, Quan received an incoming communication from the operations center. Director Arlex's holographic image appeared before her, his expression a mixture of anger and concern. "Ambassador, we've intercepted communications between the Talon Squad commander and their employer. You need to see this immediately." He transmitted a data packet to her secure device. Quan reviewed the information, her expression growing grave. "Are you certain this is accurate?" "Unfortunately, yes," Arlek replied. "It appears we've both been manipulated. The attack on the summit is merely a pretext. Their true objective is far more ambitious." "The station itself," Quan concluded. "They're planning to seize control of Zeref Prime and hold the entire Galactic Commerce Alliance to ransom." Arlek nodded grimly. "Which means our disagreements about regulatory oversight are suddenly much less important than preventing a galactic diplomatic catastrophe." "Agreed," Quan said. "We're deploying now to secure the power distribution node. Can your teams converge on the main reactor control room?" "Already in progress," Arlek confirmed. "Ambassador, good luck." As the communication ended, Quan turned to find Gorgath standing behind her, its massive form somehow moving with absolute silence, despite its size. "You have updated tactical information," the Predator observed. "Yes," Quan acknowledged. "The situation is worse than we thought. They're not just after the delegates, they want the entire station." Gorgath's sensory crown extended fully. "Then our response must escalate accordingly. The optimal strategy now requires maximum disruption of enemy forces." Quan studied the apex predator, struck by the intelligence and strategic awareness evident in its posture and speech. "Gorgath, I have to ask, why were you willing to work for Director Arlek in the first place? You clearly have your own moral framework, your own understanding of right and wrong." The Predator was silent for a moment, its compound eyes focusing on something distant. "My kind are rare now, hunted to near extinction for sport and trophy. I was artificially matured in isolation with no creche mates to form a proper social bond. The contract offered purpose, structure. It was better than emptiness." The unexpected vulnerability in the revelation left Quan momentarily speechless. Before she could respond, Commander Walsh approached. "Strike team is ready, Ambassador. We move on your order." Quan nodded, her expression resolute. "Then let's take back this station." She looked up at Gorgath. "Ready to make some noise." For the first time since its arrival on Zeref Prime, the apex predator's mandibles shifted in what could only be described as the Gorgath equivalent of a smile. With considerable enthusiasm, it replied. The corridors of Zeref Prime's outer habitation ring echoed with the sound of pulse cannon fire. Acrid smoke filled the air, limiting visibility to mere meters. Talon Squad mercenaries had established defensive positions at key junctions, their tactical formations designed to repel conventional security forces. What they had not prepared for was Gorgath. The apex predator moved like living shadow through the smoke, appearing seemingly from nowhere to strike with devastating precision before vanishing again. Neural disruptors fired repeatedly, their energy dissipating harmlessly against the predator's exoskeleton. Pulse cannons, though more effective, required a target to lock onto, and Gorgath refused to remain visible long enough for targeting systems to engage. "Sector 7 is compromised," a mercenary commander shouted into his tactical comm. "We need reinforcements." "Negative," came the response. "All available units are engaged. Hold your position." "Hold against what?" The commander demanded, panic evident in his voice. "That thing isn't following any known combat protocol. It's everywhere at once." As if to punctuate his statement, Gorgath descended from an overhead maintenance shaft, multiple limbs extended in combat configuration. Before the mercenary could raise his weapon, the Predator had disarmed him and secured him to the bulkhead with the same quick hardening resin it had used earlier. "Your contract has been terminated," Gorgath informed the immobilized mercenary, its deep voice echoing in the corridor. "Survival now depends on cooperation." Leaving the commander secured, Gorgath continued its systematic disruption of the Talon Squad defensive line. It moved with purpose, creating the illusion of multiple attackers by striking at widely separated positions in rapid succession. The mercenaries' disciplined formation began to fragment as panic spread through their ranks. Meanwhile, taking advantage of the chaos, Commander Walsh led his strike team through maintenance tunnels toward the power distribution node. The four-person team moved with the synchronized efficiency of experienced operators, each covering sectors of approach as they advanced. "The diversion's working," Walsh observed, checking the tactical display on his wrist unit. "Talon Squad is pulling forces from all over the station to deal with Gorgath." His second-in-command nodded. "Never thought I'd be grateful for having a 3-meter-tall killing machine on our side." "It's more than that," Walsh replied, as they approached the final junction before the power node. "Did you notice how it's handling the mercenaries' non-lethal takedowns, wherever possible? That's not instinct, that's a conscious ethical choice." Before the conversation could continue, their tactical sensors detected movement ahead. 2 Talon Squad operators had remained at the power node entrance, their weapons trained on the approach corridor. Walsh signaled his team to hold position, then activated his secure communication link. "Ambassador, we've reached the target, but there's a welcoming committee. Any update from our friend?" Quan's voice came through clearly. "Gorgath reports that 37% of Talon Squad forces have been neutralized or contained. The remaining units are consolidating in defensive positions. You should have a clear approach in approximately 2 minutes." True to her word, the team's sensors soon registered movement as the 2 guards received new orders through their tactical network. They exchanged uncertain glances, then moved away from their position, heading toward the center of the disturbance Gorgath was creating. "That's our window," Walsh whispered. "Move in standard breach protocol." The team executed their entry flawlessly, securing the power distribution node within 30 seconds. As the last team member entered the heavy security doors sealed behind them. "Power node secured," Walsh reported. "Beginning system lockdown to prevent remote override." "Excellent work, Commander," Quan responded. "Director Arlick's teams have secured the reactor control room and are working to restore full security protocols. The tide is turning." In the diplomatic quarter, Ambassador Quan coordinated the joint response from the makeshift command center. The earlier tension between the Earth Alliance and Zaref Prime personnel had given way to efficient cooperation as they worked toward the common goal of reclaiming the station. A holographic communication from Director Arlick appeared at the central console. Despite the crisis, he had somehow managed to maintain his immaculate appearance, though the strain was evident in his eyes. "Ambassador, my teams report that Talon Squad forces are retreating from multiple sectors. They appear to be converging on the main docking bay. I believe they're preparing to evacuate." "Consolidate our forces to cut off their escape route," Quan suggested. "If we can capture their leadership, we might learn who orchestrated this attack." Arlick's expression became guarded. "I've already dispatched security teams to intercept. However, there's another matter we need to discuss." He paused, clearly, uncomfortable with what he was about to say. "The Gorgath situation." Quan maintained her professional demeanor. "What about it?" "It's violated its contract," Arlick stated flatly. "By all rights, I should activate the termination protocols." "And yet you haven't," Quan observed. Arlick's jaw tightened. "I recognize the..." tactical advantages of its current behavior. For the moment, I'm willing to overlook the breach. But once this crisis is resolved, we will need to address its status. Its status, Quan repeated emphasis on the pronoun. Not its status. Gorgoth has demonstrated sapient decision-making, ethical reasoning, and tactical intelligence far beyond what you described as a security asset. I believe that changes the legal framework considerably. The contract was binding, Arlek insisted. The neural restraints were designed to ensure compliance with a contract, Quan interrupted. But contracts can be voided when one party acts in bad faith, or when the terms are fundamentally inequitable. I think any reasonable arbitration would find that forcing a sentient being into what amounts to indentured servitude falls under that category. Arlek's face flushed with anger. This is precisely the kind of external interference in station operations that we've been fighting against. You have no jurisdiction. Article 7 of the Galactic Commerce Charter. Quan cut in smoothly. All member stations must adhere to the Sentient Rights Accord. Zaref Prime is a signatory director. Or were you planning to argue that Gorgoth doesn't qualify as sentient? The legal trap was obvious, and Arlek's expression showed he recognized it. Before he could formulate a response, alarms blared throughout the station. Reactor containment breach in progress, announced the station's automated system. Emergency protocols initiated. All personnel evacuate to designated safety zones. What's happening? Quan demanded. Arlek's attention shifted to another display. Talon Squad's final gambit. They've initiated a cascading failure in the reactor cooling systems. If they can't control the station, they'll destroy it. Can it be stopped? Theoretically, yes. But the manual override requires physical access to the reactor core. The radiation levels would be lethal to any of my staff. Arlek's voice was tight with controlled panic. Evacuation is our only option now. Quan's expression hardened. We're not abandoning the station. Not when there are still hundreds of delegates and civilians on board. She activated her communication link. Gorgoth, do you copy? The Apex Predator's deep voice responded immediately. I am here, Ambassador. We have a situation. The reactor core is destabilizing. We need someone who can withstand extreme radiation to manually override the coolant systems. There was a brief pause before Gorgoth replied. My species evolved on a world with high background radiation. I can withstand exposure levels that would be fatal to most carbon-based life forms. Transmit the necessary procedures. Arlek, overhearing the exchange, looked shocked. You can't be serious. Even if it survives the radiation, the security protocols won't allow it access to the core. The biometric scanners can be overridden with your authorization code, Quan pointed out. Unless you'd prefer to explain to the Galactic Commerce Alliance how you allowed their entire diplomatic corps to be vaporized because of procedural concerns. Arlek hesitated only briefly before nodding. Transmitting authorization codes now, but make it clear to your ally that this doesn't change its contractual obligations. Quan ignored the qualification. Gorgoth, you have the override procedures and access codes. We're evacuating all personnel from the sectors surrounding the reactor core. You'll have a clear path. Acknowledged, the Predator responded. Beginning approach now. As the communication ended, Quan turned back to Arlek's holographic image. Director, I suggest we focus on evacuating the diplomatic quarter. If Gorgoth can't stabilize the reactor, we'll need to get as many people off the station as possible. Arlek nodded grimly. Evacuation protocols are already in progress. But Ambassador, he paused, meeting her gaze directly. If we survive this, we will revisit the matter of jurisdiction and regulatory oversight. This incident has exposed vulnerabilities in our current system. Quan allowed herself a small smile. I look forward to those discussions, Director. They promise to be much more productive than our previous exchanges. As the evacuation began, Quan couldn't help but reflect on the irony of the situation. She had come to Zaref Prime to advocate for greater cooperation and shared security protocols among independent stations. Instead, she found herself in the middle of a crisis that had made her case more effectively than any diplomatic argument ever could. And at the center of it all was Gorgath, a being that had been brought to the station as a symbol of intimidation, only to become the embodiment of the very principles she had come to champion. The reactor core of Zeref Prime glowed with an ominous blue light, the radiation levels having already exceeded safety parameters. Warning klaxons echoed through the deserted corridors as automated systems attempted to compensate for the cascading failure. Thermal shielding had started to degrade, creating shimmering distortions in the air as heat escaped the containment field. Into this lethal environment moved Gorgath, its massive form silhouetted against the pulsing reactor light. The apex predator's exoskeleton had partially reconfigured additional layers of protective plating, shifting to cover more vulnerable areas. Its sensory crown was fully retracted compound eyes, narrowed to minimize exposure. Approaching primary cooling control junction, Gorgath reported through the communication link. Radiation levels at 3700 MSV and rising. Estimated time to catastrophic containment failure, 12 minutes, 17 seconds. In the evacuation zone, Ambassador Quan monitored the Predator's progress on a holographic display. Director Arlek stood beside her, their earlier animosity temporarily set aside in the face of imminent destruction. "The radiation would have killed any of my staff instantly." Arlek murmured, a reluctant note of admiration in his voice. "Even with its physiological advantages, I'm surprised it volunteered." Quan corrected absently, her attention focused on the display. "Not it, he." Arlek raised an eyebrow but didn't argue the point. "The override sequence requires precise timing. The coolant system has to be reset in exactly the right sequence, or it could accelerate the breakdown instead of stopping it." Quan nodded, her expression tense. "Gorgath, are you receiving the procedural data clearly?" "Affirmative," came the Predator's response. Its deep voice, slightly distorted by radiation interference. "The sequence is elegant. I appreciate its mathematical symmetry." Despite the crisis, Quan felt a smile tug at her lips. There was something endearingly incongruous about a 3-meter apex predator admiring the aesthetic qualities of a reactor cooling sequence. "The first access panel should be directly ahead of you," Arlek instructed, setting aside his reservations to focus on the task at hand. "You'll need to enter my authorization code to disable the security lockout." Gorgath moved to the indicated panel, extending one of its manipulator limbs to interface with the control system. "Code accepted. Security protocols disengaged. Proceeding to primary coolant manifold." The next few minutes unfolded in tense silence as Gorgath navigated the increasingly unstable reactor chamber. Parts of the superstructure had begun to warp from the heat, creating obstacles that hadn't been present on the schematics. Yet the Predator moved with deliberate precision, adapting to the changing environment with fluid grace. "Warning," the station's automated system announced. "Reactor temperature exceeding critical threshold. Catastrophic failure imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately." "We're running out of time," Arlek muttered, his composure finally cracking under the strain. "The evacuation shuttles can't possibly transport everyone before the core breaches." Quan maintained her focus on the display. "Gorgath status update." "Accessing primary coolant controls now," the Predator reported. "The sabotage is more extensive than anticipated. Manual sequencing will be required for each individual coolant channel." "That will take too long," Arlek protested. "The automated sequence was our only hope." Gorgath's response was calm, almost philosophical. "Time is relative when each moment is lived fully. I will complete the sequence." What followed was a demonstration of cognitive and physical capabilities that left both Quan and Arlek watching in stunned silence. Gorgath's multiple limbs moved in perfect coordination, accessing different control panels simultaneously. Its compound eyes tracked multiple diagnostic displays, making split-second adjustments to the cooling sequence based on real-time feedback. "Remarkable," murmured a Verandi scientist who had joined the evacuation team. "It's processing multiple complex operations in parallel." I've never seen anything like it outside of dedicated computing systems. Primary coolant channels, 1 through 7, restored, Gorgath reported. Containment field, stabilizing at 78% efficiency. Beginning recalibration of secondary systems. As the Predator worked, the station's emergency indicators began to shift from critical red to cautionary yellow. The automated warnings became less frequent, then stopped entirely. "It's working," Arlek said, disbelief evident in his voice. "The core temperature is dropping. We're going to survive this." Quan nodded, relief washing over her. "Gorgath, what's your status? The radiation levels must still be extreme." There was a longer pause than usual before the Predator responded. "Functionality, adequate. Task completion is the priority. Temporary physiological stress is acceptable." The clinical description couldn't hide the strain in Gorgath's voice. Quan exchanged a concerned glance with Arlek. Is he in danger?" Arlek asked quietly. "I don't know," Quan admitted. "We don't have enough data on Gorgath physiology to know the limits of radiation tolerance." Final cooling sequence initiated, Gorgath reported. Reactor stabilization at 92% and rising. Mission objective near completion. The tension in the evacuation zone began to dissipate as it became clear that catastrophe had been averted. Security teams reported that the remaining Talon Squad mercenaries had been captured or had surrendered, their escape plans thwarted by the combined Earth Alliance and Zeref Prime forces. Containment restored, announced the station's automated system. Reactor function normalized. Emergency status lifted. A cheer went up from the assembled staff and delegates. Quan allowed herself a moment of relief before returning her attention to the communication link. "Gorgath, you've done it. The station is safe. Begin your extraction immediately." The silence that followed was concerning. "Gorgath, do you copy?" Quan repeated, tension creeping back into her voice. When the response finally came, it was noticeably weaker than before. "Extraction, in progress. Movement capabilities, temporarily compromised. Radiation effects more significant than anticipated." Arlek stepped forward. "We need to send a rescue team." "The radiation levels are still too high for your staff," Quan pointed out. "Not for environmental drones," Arlek countered. "We use them for maintenance in hazardous areas. They could help extract him from the reactor chamber." Quan nodded gratefully. "Do it." As Arlek coordinated the drone deployment, Quan maintained contact with Gorgath. "Help is on the way. Just hold on." An interesting phrase. The Predator observed, its voice faint but thoughtful. To hold on. As if existence itself is something that must be gripped firmly to prevent its escape. "That's exactly what it means," Quan confirmed, concern growing at the philosophical turn. "And I need you to hold on very tightly right now." "I will attempt to comply," Gorgath replied. "Though I find myself contemplating the nature of contracts with greater clarity than before. The strongest contracts are not written in documents or enforced by neural restraints. They are the unspoken bonds formed through mutual respect and shared purpose." Quan exchanged a worried glance with Arlek, who had returned to her side. "The radiation may be affecting his neural functions," she said quietly. "Or perhaps," Arlek suggested, surprising her, "it has stripped away the artificial constraints we placed upon a mind far more complex than we understood." Before Quan could respond, the drone operator announced, "Contact established. Visual feed coming online now." The holographic display shifted to show the reactor chamber from the drone's perspective. The scene was one of chaotic beauty. The stabilized reactor core pulsed with regulated energy, while the cooling systems hummed with renewed efficiency. And there, slumped against a control console, was Gorgath. The Predator's exoskeleton showed signs of radiation damage, with portions discolored and warped from exposure. Its normally fluid movements were now jerky and uncoordinated as it attempted to rise. "Extraction drones approaching subject now," the operator reported. "Magnetic lifters activating to assist movement." The drones surrounded Gorgath, their mechanical arms extending to provide support. With their assistance, The Predator began the slow journey back through the reactor complex toward the safety of the radiation containment area. "Hang in there," Quan encouraged, watching the laborious progress on the display. "You're going to make it. Survival is preferable." Gorgath acknowledged, his voice stronger, now that he was moving away from the intense radiation. "There is much I wish to learn about your species. You are anomalous in ways I find fascinating." "I think that feeling is mutual," Quan replied with a small smile. "We have a lot to learn from each other." As the extraction continued, Director Arlek approached with a datapad. "Ambassador, I believe this is yours now." He handed her the device, its screen, displaying Gorgath's original contract. Quan looked at him questioningly. "What are you saying, Director?" Arlek's expression was carefully neutral, but something had shifted in his demeanor. "I'm acknowledging reality. The contract has already been transferred in every way that matters. This just makes it official." Quan accepted the pad, studying the complex legal language. "What about the neural restraints?" "The control codes are included," Arlek confirmed. "Though after today's demonstration, I question whether they were ever truly effective or merely respected, as long as Gorgath chose to respect them." It was a significant concession from a man who had built his career on controlling others. Quan recognized the gesture for what it was: not merely a transfer of property, but an acknowledgement of autonomous choice. "Thank you, Director. This is a step toward the kind of cooperation I was hoping to establish when I arrived." Arlek nodded stiffly. "Don't mistake practicality for ideological conversion, Ambassador. I still believe independent stations require independence. But perhaps some standardized protocols wouldn't be entirely detrimental to commerce." It was as close to a diplomatic victory as Quan could have hoped for under the circumstances. She was about to respond when the extraction team announced, "Subject secured in decontamination chamber. Medical team standing by for assessment." "I'll go to him," Quan decided, already moving toward the exit. "Director, would you care to join me? I believe we have a new contract to negotiate, one based on mutual respect rather than neural restraints." Arlek hesitated only briefly before following. "I suppose that would be appropriate. After all, it seems both our perspectives have been expanded by recent events." As they made their way through the station corridors, now bustling with relieved personnel and delegates, Quan reflected on the irony of the situation. She had come to Zeref Prime to advocate for greater cooperation among diverse systems. Instead, it had taken an apex predator, supposedly the embodiment of solitary ferocity, to demonstrate the power of cooperation and ethical choice. The decontamination chamber was a sterile white environment, with advanced medical equipment lining the walls. Through the observation window, Quan could see Gorgath receiving treatment from the station's xenobiological specialists. The Predator seemed smaller, somehow its normally imposing presence diminished by injury and exhaustion. Yet even in this weakened state, there was a dignity to its bearing that commanded respect. "The radiation damage is extensive, but not life-threatening," reported the chief medical officer. "His species appears to have remarkable regenerative capabilities. With proper care, recovery should be complete within a few standard weeks." "And the neural functioning?" Arlek asked. "Unimpaired as far as we can determine. In fact, neural activity has increased significantly in certain cognitive centers. It's almost as if the radiation exposure triggered some form of accelerated development." Quan and Arlek exchanged meaningful glances. The implications were profound, not just for Gorgath, but for their understanding of sentience itself. "I'd like to speak with him," Quan requested. The medical officer hesitated. "He's been through a traumatic experience. Perhaps after he's rested." "It's all right," came Gorgath's deep voice through the chamber's communication system. "I would speak with them now." Granted permission, Quan and Arlek entered the chamber. Up close, the damage to Gorgath's exoskeleton was more evident. Patches of the normally iridescent surface had dulled to a matte gray, and fine cracks were visible in the armored plates. Yet the compound eyes remained bright and alert, focusing on the two figures with obvious recognition. Ambassador, Director, Gorgath acknowledged them each in turn. The station is secured. Thanks to you, Quan confirmed. The reactor is stable and the mercenaries have been contained. The summit will proceed as planned, though with a slightly altered agenda. Regulatory oversight being a much more popular topic now, Arlek added dryly. Gorgath's sensory crown extended slightly, a sign of interest. Evolution often requires catalyst events to overcome resistance to change. This is true of biological systems and socio-political structures alike. A philosopher as well as a warrior, Quan observed with a smile. You continue to surprise us. Surprise is the natural consequence of incomplete information, Gorgath replied. Your species initially categorized mine as simple predators. We categorized yours as simple prey. Both assessments were inaccurate due to limited interaction. The blunt assessment startled a laugh from Quan. Well, when you put it that way, I suppose we're all guilty of assumptions. Arlek stepped forward, his expression serious. I've transferred your contract to Ambassador Quan. The neural restraint codes are included. You'll find the Earth Alliance less controlling in their application. Gorgath's compound eyes shifted to focus on Arlek. The transfer is acknowledged, but unnecessary. Unnecessary, Arlek repeated, confusion evident in his voice. The contract exists only as a formality now, Gorgath explained. My choice was made when I first encountered the human delegation. Your documentation merely follows reality, not creates it. Arlek seemed unsure how to respond to this philosophical challenge to his bureaucratic worldview. Quan stepped in smoothly. Nevertheless, the formality has value in our systems. It ensures your legal status and protections. She held up the datapad. However, I propose a new contract, not one of ownership or control, but of mutual alliance. The Earth delegation would be honored to have you join us as a security consultant and cultural liaison. Gorgath's sensory crown extended fully, indicating heightened interest. A contract between equals. Exactly, Quan confirmed, with terms negotiated to respect your autonomy and compensate you fairly for your expertise. The Predator was silent for a moment, its compound eyes shifting between Quan and Arlek. Finally it spoke. I accept these terms. The human approach to survival through cooperation rather than domination is worthy of study and emulation. It represents an evolutionary advantage my kind would be foolish to ignore. Arlek shook his head, a hint of grudging admiration in his expression. When I acquired you as a security asset, I never imagined you'd end up teaching us about diplomacy. The universe contains many unexpected lessons, Gorgath replied. The wisest beings are those willing to learn from sources they initially dismissed. The pointed observation wasn't lost on either human. Quan smiled diplomatically, while Arlek had the grace to look somewhat abashed. Rest and recover, Quan told Gorgath. The summit reconvenes tomorrow, and I suspect you'll be the center of much attention. The other delegations are eager to meet the hero who saved Zeref Prime. Hero. Gorgath repeated the word as if testing its meaning. An interesting concept. My actions were logical, not heroic. The station's destruction would have eliminated all possible futures. Preserving it maximized potential outcomes. Sometimes logic and heroism coincide, Quan suggested. Regardless of terminology, we're grateful. As they prepared to leave, Gorgath spoke again. Ambassador Quan, I have a request. Of course. When my recovery is complete, I wish to visit Earth. To understand the environment that produced a species capable of transforming apex predators into allies through respect rather than force. The request caught Quan by surprise, but she nodded without hesitation. I think that can be arranged. Earth would welcome the opportunity to learn from you as well. As they left the medical chamber, Arlek seemed lost in thought. Finally, he spoke. This changes everything, doesn't it? If beings like Gorgath can be reasoned with, can form alliances based on mutual respect, rather than fear or domination. It opens up possibilities we've never considered, Quan agreed. Perhaps the galaxy is less hostile than we've assumed. Perhaps cooperation really is the ultimate evolutionary advantage. Arlec's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced, but he was at least considering the idea. I still believe in independence and self-determination, he said. But I'm willing to concede that standardized ethical frameworks might have value, especially when dealing with species we've previously misunderstood. The two leaders walked in silence for a moment, the weight of the day's events settling around them like a physical presence. What will happen to the mercenaries? Quan asked finally. They'll be detained and processed according to galactic commerce protocols, Arlec replied, though I suspect their employer will never be definitively identified. You have suspicions? Arlec's thin smile held no humor. Several. The destabilization of independent trading stations would benefit multiple factions. The corporate hegemony of Sirius has been pushing for privatization of trade routes. The Procyon Collective stands to gain if regulatory oversight increases costs for independent operators. Even certain elements within the Earth Alliance might see advantage in a security crisis that demonstrates the need for standardized protocols. Quan raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting my government orchestrated an attack against its own delegation? Not officially, perhaps. But power structures are rarely monolithic. Factions exist within all systems. It was a pragmatic assessment that Quan couldn't entirely dismiss. If you're right, then what happened here today is even more significant. A coordinated attack designed to push competing agendas ended up demonstrating the value of cooperation across traditional boundaries, including species boundaries. As they entered the central concourse, they found it transformed from the chaotic battleground of hours ago. Maintenance crews worked efficiently to repair damage from the conflict. Delegates who had been evacuated were returning to their quarters, an air of subdued excitement replacing the earlier fear. And throughout it all, the unique phenomenon of interspecies cooperation was evident. Earth Alliance security personnel worked alongside Zaref Prime staff. Hadarians with their translucent skin helped methane breathers from Tau Ceti repair environmental systems. The shared crisis had created bonds that diplomatic niceties never could. Perhaps there's something to your philosophy after all, Ambassador Arlec admitted reluctantly. Though I maintain that independence has its value. As do I, Quan assured him. Earth didn't join the Alliance to surrender sovereignty, but to establish common ground on which diverse systems could interact safely. Independence and interdependence aren't mutually exclusive. Arlec seemed about to respond when his communication device chimed. The Galactic Commerce Council is convening an emergency session to address today's events, he reported after checking the message. They're requesting our presence, both of us, to provide first-hand accounts. And Gorgath, Quan asked. Specifically included in the summons. Arlec confirmed surprise evident in his voice. It seems our friend has made quite an impression on the Council already. The implications weren't lost on either of them. A non-humanoid species being invited to address the Galactic Commerce Council was unprecedented. The political, social, and philosophical ramifications would resonate throughout the Alliance. It appears we've all undergone a form of evolution today, Quan observed. Sometimes the most significant changes arise from the most unexpected sources. As they parted ways to prepare for the council session, neither human noticed the maintenance drone hovering discreetly in a service alcove, its surveillance protocols active. The data it had gathered, the conversations, the shifting alliances, the philosophical revelations was being transmitted on an encrypted channel to a location far beyond Zaref Prime. In a chamber of obsidian and starlight figures, gathered around a holographic display showing the unfolding events. Their features were obscured by the chamber's strategic lighting, their identities protected by layers of secrecy and misdirection. The experiment proceeds as anticipated, observed a voice from the darkness. Unexpected variables have emerged, but the fundamental hypothesis remains valid. The Gorgath specimen has exceeded parameters, noted another voice. Its cognitive evolution was not predicted by the models. Evolution is inherently unpredictable, countered a third. That is its value as a force for change. The first speaker gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show Gorgath in the medical chamber, its damaged exoskeleton, already showing signs of regeneration. The question remains, do we proceed to Phase 2? A moment of silence fell over the assembly, each member weighing the implications of escalation against the risks of restraint. Finally, a consensus emerged. Phase 2 is authorized. Prepare the secondary specimens for deployment. The experiment will proceed. The display flickered and dissolved, leaving the chamber in darkness once more. The secret architects of crisis and change returned to their patient observation, confident in the knowledge that the true implications of the day's events remained hidden from those who had lived through them. On Scifi Prime, blissfully unaware of the larger game being played, life began to return to normal. The summit would resume, policies would be debated, compromises would be reached. But beneath the surface of these routine diplomatic proceedings, a profound shift had occurred. An apex predator had chosen to protect rather than hunt. A station director had begun to question his definition of independence, and an ambassador had discovered that the principles she championed could transcend not just political boundaries, but biological ones as well. In the medical chamber, Gorgath rested, its compound eyes dimmed, in a state analogous to sleep. But its mind remained active, processing the events of the day, analyzing the interactions it had witnessed, and contemplating the nature of the contract it had chosen to honor, not the one written in legal terms and enforced by neural restraints, but the unspoken one that connected intelligent beings across the vastness of space and the diversity of evolution. The universe, it seemed, was full of unexpected alliances waiting to be formed. And in that simple truth lay the seeds of a transformation more profound than any could imagine. 2 days later, the Grand Assembly Hall was filled to capacity. Delegates from every system represented at the summit had gathered for what many were already calling a historic session. The reconstruction efforts had been remarkably efficient, with few signs remaining of the battle that had raged through these chambers. Even the Earth Alliance delegation's table, which had been at the center of the conflict, had been replaced with an identical model, the only difference being a slightly larger space allocated beside Ambassador Kwan's seat. Security Director Arlek entered from one side of the hall, his formal uniform immaculate, his posture rigid with the dignity of his office. Whatever private revelations he might have experienced, his public persona remained one of cool professionalism. Yet those who knew him well might have noticed subtle differences, a slightly less dismissive attitude toward the delegates. He passed a moment taken to acknowledge the Hadarian representative with more than perfunctory courtesy. From the opposite entrance came Ambassador Kwan, similarly attired in the formal diplomatic uniform of the Earth Alliance. The navy blue fabric with its silver trim conveyed authority tempered by accessibility, the carefully crafted image of Earth's approach to interstellar relations. She moved through the hall with confident grace, exchanging brief greetings with allies and economic competitors alike. The atmosphere in the hall shifted perceptibly when the third figure entered. Gorgath moved with its characteristic fluid precision, its massive form drawing every eye in the chamber. The damage to its exoskeleton was still visible in places, the regeneration process ongoing. But these marks of sacrifice seemed only to enhance the predator's imposing presence. What was new, and immediately noticed by the assembled delegates, was the absence of the neural restraint apparatus that had previously encircled its sensory crown. In its place was a simple band bearing the Earth Alliance insignia, not a control device, but a symbol of affiliation freely chosen. The apex predator took its place beside Ambassador Kwan, towering over the human delegates, yet somehow conveying not menace, but protective vigilance. The symbolism was lost on no one present. The Galactic Commerce Council representative, a Verandi, whose crystalline features reflected the chamber's light in prismatic patterns, called the session to order. "We convene under extraordinary circumstances," the Verandi began, voice modulated to carry clearly to all sections of the hall. What was to be a standard policy summit has become a landmark event in the history of our alliance. Before we return to our scheduled negotiations, the Council has determined that recent events must be formally acknowledged. The representative gestured to Arlek. Security Director, the Council recognizes your eventual cooperation was instrumental in resolving the crisis. Your willingness to adapt to changing circumstances prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of life. Arlek acknowledged the statement with a formal nod, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Ambassador Quan, the Verandi continued. The Earth Alliance's security protocols and rapid response capabilities have demonstrated the value of standardized emergency procedures across independent systems. Your delegation's actions have given practical weight to the theoretical frameworks you have long advocated. Quan inclined her head in gracious acceptance of the recognition. And, finally, the representative's crystalline features shifted toward Gorgath. The Council finds itself in the unprecedented position of formally acknowledging the contributions of a non-alliance species. Your actions in defense of this station and its occupants have challenged many long-held assumptions about the nature of interspecies cooperation. The hall fell silent as Gorgath's sensory crown extended slightly, the predator's equivalent of heightened attention. The Council therefore proposes the establishment of a new diplomatic designation, Autonomous Allied Entity. This status would recognize sentient beings who, while not representing a member system, have demonstrated commitment to alliance principles and earned the right to formal recognition. Murmurs spread through the hall as delegates processed the implications. It was a fundamental expansion of the alliance's conceptual framework, opening diplomatic doors that had previously remained firmly closed. Does the Security Director wish to comment on this proposal? The Verandi asked. Arlek stepped forward, his face composed. Zaref Prime acknowledges the necessity of evolving our understanding of sentience and diplomatic standing. Recent events have demonstrated that our traditional categories may be insufficient. While I maintain that independent systems must preserve their sovereignty, I support the proposed designation. It was a carefully balanced statement, protecting his political position while acknowledging the inevitable change sweeping through the alliance. The delegates recognized the concession inherent in his support, and a murmur of approval rippled through the hall. Ambassador Quan. Quan rose, her expression thoughtful. The Earth Alliance welcomes this evolution in our collective understanding. Throughout human history, we have repeatedly discovered that our preconceptions about intelligent sentience and the capacity for ethical reasoning were too narrow. It seems that pattern continues as we explore the stars. She glanced up at Gorgath. We enthusiastically support the proposed designation and look forward to a future where diverse forms of intelligence can find common ground in shared principles rather than shared biology. The Verandi representative nodded, then addressed Gorgath directly. As the subject of this proposed designation, your perspective is perhaps the most relevant. The Council invites your thoughts. All eyes turned to the apex predator as it stepped forward. Despite having witnessed its intelligence and ethical reasoning during the crisis, many delegates still registered surprise when Gorgath spoke. The deep, resonant voice filled the chamber without need for amplification. I am not a diplomat. Gorgath began echoing Arlek's words from their first meeting in a subtle reminder of how circumstances had changed. I am by evolutionary design a hunter, yet intelligence wherever it evolves eventually faces the same question: is survival alone sufficient purpose? The philosophical depth of the opening caught many delegates by surprise. They had expected perhaps gratitude or simple acceptance, not a fundamental existential inquiry. My kind evolved to be solitary apex predators, Gorgath continued. Cooperation was unnecessary for survival. Yet here I stand, having discovered that protection, rather than predation, offers a more complex and satisfying application of my capabilities. This suggests that evolution may have multiple endpoints beyond mere survival, that intelligence itself, may seek meaning through connection, rather than isolation. The Hadarian representative's translucent skin pulsed with excitement at this philosophical turn. Across the hall, delegates were leaning forward, captured by the Predator's unexpected eloquence. I accept the proposed designation not merely as recognition of individual action, but as acknowledgement of a universal truth that sentience, regardless of its biological origin, contains the potential for ethical reasoning and cooperative advancement. The true apex position in any ecosystem is not achieved through dominance alone, but through the ability to form alliances that amplify collective capability. Gorgath's compound eyes swept the hall, taking in the diverse representatives of galactic civilization. The contract I now honor is not written in documents or enforced by neural restraints. It is the tacit agreement among sentient beings to seek advancement through mutual respect rather than exploitation. This seems to be the foundation of your alliance at its best. I am gratified to play a role in its evolution. As the Predator concluded, a moment of profound silence fell over the hall. Then, beginning with the Hadarian delegation and spreading quickly through the chamber, a wave of approval, manifestations, applause from humanoids, light displays from crystalline species, harmonic emissions from energy beings filled the air. It was more than diplomatic courtesy. It was genuine appreciation for a perspective that had forced them all to expand their understanding. The formal session proceeded from there, returning to the scheduled negotiations with a notably different tone. Discussions that had been contentious now found paths to compromise. Delegates who had been firm in their positions discovered flexibility. The shared experience of crisis, combined with the philosophical challenge presented by Gorgath's very existence, had created an atmosphere where cooperation seemed not just expedient, but philosophically justified. In a quiet moment between sessions, Ambassador Quan found herself alone with Gorgath in one of the station's observation lounges. The vast panorama of stars stretched before them, a silent reminder of the scale against which their recent experiences played out. That was quite a speech, Quan observed. For someone who claims not to be a diplomat, you have a remarkable grasp of how to move an audience. Gorgath's sensory crown adjusted in what Quan had come to recognize as the Predator's equivalent of a thoughtful tilt of the head. Hunting requires understanding prey psychology. Diplomacy requires understanding peer psychology. The principles are not dissimilar. Quan laughed. When you put it that way, I suppose the Galactic Commerce Alliance isn't so different from an ecosystem. Predators and prey, all trying to maximize advantage while avoiding disaster. With the crucial distinction that in true ecosystems, roles are fixed by biology, Gorgath noted. In sapient societies, roles are increasingly determined by choice. The human capacity to reimagine social structures rather than merely inherit them is fascinating to me. And sometimes frustrating, Quan admitted. Change comes slowly, often only after crisis forces us to see beyond our established patterns. Yet it comes, Gorgath observed. Your species began as prey animals, physically inferior to many predators on your world. Now you traverse the stars, forming alliances with beings your ancestors could not have imagined. The capacity for transformation seems central to your evolutionary advantage. Quan considered this perspective. I hadn't thought of it that way. We tend to focus on our limitations, on how far we still have to go. Perhaps that itself is adaptive, Gorgath suggested. Eternal dissatisfaction drives continuous improvement. Their philosophical discussion was interrupted as Director Arlick entered the lounge. He hesitated briefly upon seeing them, then approached with formal correctness. Ambassador, Gorgath. He acknowledged each with a nod. The final session convenes in 30 minutes. The trade framework vote will proceed as scheduled. Thank you, Director, Quan replied. Will you join us for a moment? Arlick seemed about to decline, then reconsidered. He took a position at the viewport, maintaining a careful distance from Gorgath. The three stood in silence for a moment, watching the slow rotation of stars beyond the station. "I've been reviewing the security logs," Arlex said finally. "There's something that doesn't align with standard tactical analysis." Quan raised an eyebrow. "Oh, the mercenaries were too well informed about our systems, yet made fundamental strategic errors. Their final gambit with the reactor was particularly illogical. They must have known the station had failsafes that would prevent complete destruction." "Perhaps they were desperate," Quan suggested. "Professional mercenaries don't act from desperation," Arlek countered. "They follow protocols and risk assessments. This felt staged." Gorgath's sensory crown extended fully, indicating heightened interest. "You believe the attack had purpose beyond its stated objective?" Arlek's thin lips pressed together. "I believe we may have been manipulated, all of us. The question is, to what end?" The implications hung in the air between them. If the attack had been orchestrated as something more than a simple power grab, then everything that followed the crisis, the cooperation, the philosophical revelations, the policy changes, might have been anticipated, even planned for. "That's a disturbing thought," Quan admitted. "But even if true, does it change the value of what we've learned? Does the validity of an insight depend on how we came to it?" "A philosophical question worthy of our new diplomatic colleague," Arlek observed with a trace of dry humor, nodding toward Gorgath. The Predator was silent for a moment, compound eyes reflecting the starscape. "In hunting, the prey's path sometimes reveals more than the hunter's intent. Whatever forces may have set these events in motion, the outcomes reflect truths that existed independently of their machinations." It was a perspective that offered neither comfortable certainty nor paralyzing doubt, a middle path that acknowledged manipulation might exist without surrendering to helplessness in the face of it. "Then we proceed with open eyes," Quan decided. "Aware that larger forces may be at work, but committed to the principles we've discovered through this crisis." "Agreed," Arlex said, surprising them both with his ready concurrence. "Though I'll be significantly expanding our counterintelligence capabilities." As they made their way to the final session, the unlikely trio station director, Earth Ambassador, and Apex Predator presented a visual embodiment of the new approach taking shape throughout the Alliance. Different in form, function, and philosophy, yet finding common purpose in shared principles. The final vote on the trade framework passed with unprecedented support. The new regulations included standardized security protocols for all member stations, with provisions for independent implementation, a balance that would have seemed impossible before the crisis. Gorgath was formally recognized as the first autonomous allied entity, a designation that would open doors for other non-system intelligences throughout the galaxy. As the summit concluded, delegates departed Zaref Prime, with stories that would spread throughout their home systems. Stories of crisis and cooperation, of philosophical revelations and practical solutions. But most of all, stories of an apex predator who had chosen to protect rather than hunt, upending assumptions about the nature of intelligence and the foundations of interspecies relations. On the Earth Alliance transport vessel preparing for departure, Ambassador Quan stood at the viewport watching as Zaref Prime diminished in the distance. Beside her, Gorgath observed the station with compound eyes, designed to miss nothing. "Will you miss it?" Quan asked. "It was your first experience of the wider galaxy." "Miss is not the precise term," Gorgath replied thoughtfully. "I will integrate the experience into my understanding, but anticipation of Earth exceeds any attachment to the station." Quan smiled. "You may find us disappointing after all this excitement. Most days on Earth involve considerably less drama than what you've experienced here." "The absence of crisis is not disappointment," Gorgath observed. "It is opportunity for deeper understanding. I am particularly interested in observing how humans interact with the predator species of your world. The evolutionary parallels may be illuminating." "Well, our relationship with Earth's predators is complicated," Quan admitted. "Fear, respect, conservation, exploitation. It's a mixed history. Perhaps your perspective will help us see those relationships in a new light." As the transport entered the jump point, spatial distortion creating a momentary rainbow effect across the viewport, Quan reflected on the transformation that had occurred in such a short time. What had begun as a standard diplomatic mission had evolved into a fundamental reconsideration of how different forms of intelligence might interact. "Something amuses you?" Gorgath inquired, noting her expression. "I was just thinking about first impressions," Quan replied. "When I saw you standing beside Director Arlek, I thought you were exactly what you appeared to be, a living weapon, an intimidation tactic. I couldn't have imagined we'd end up here." "Appearances evolved for immediate survival advantage," Gorgath noted. "Intelligence evolved for long-term adaptation. The conflict between the two creates the space in which new possibilities emerge." As the transport accelerated toward Earth, carrying its unprecedented diplomatic passenger, the sentiment echoed through systems far beyond their knowledge. In chambers of power throughout the galaxy, reports were analyzed, implications assessed, strategies reformulated. The unexpected alliance between human and apex predator had sent ripples through political calculations and philosophical assumptions alike. In the obsidian chamber, where the architects of crisis had gathered, the holographic display showed the Earth transport's trajectory. The shadowed figures observed in silence their earlier certainty, tempered by outcomes that had exceeded even their calculations. "Phase 2 must be accelerated," one voice finally declared. "The cognitive evolution proceeds faster than anticipated." "Caution is warranted," countered another. "Accelerated deployment carries increased risk of detection." "The risk is acceptable," decided the first. "The potential rewards have grown beyond our initial projections. Prepare the Earth protocols." As the transport carrying Quan and Gorgath continued its journey, neither was aware that they had become focal points in a game whose true parameters remained hidden. They knew only that they had discovered something profound in the crucible of crisis, that across the vast divides of evolutionary history and biological design, intelligence could recognize intelligence. Ethical reasoning could align with ethical reasoning, and cooperation could emerge from the most unlikely combinations of predator and protector. In the sleeping quarters assigned to Gorgath, the apex predator did not rest. Instead, it stood at the viewport compound, eyes fixed on the starscape sensory crown, fully extended to absorb every nuance of its new environment. In the privacy of this moment, it allowed itself to process the full significance of the transformation it had undergone. From captive weapon to autonomous ally. From solitary hunter to philosophical pioneer. From apex predator to something entirely new, a category for which the galaxy did not yet have a name. As Earth grew closer with each passing moment, Gorgath contemplated the next evolution, awaiting both itself and the humans, whose approach to survival had so dramatically altered its understanding of the universe. Whatever forces might be manipulating events from the shadows, whatever crises might lie ahead, the fundamental truth remained. In the vastness of space, among the countless paths of evolution, intelligence had found a way to recognize itself across the boundaries of biology. And in that recognition lay possibilities limited only by imagination and courage. For an apex predator, accustomed to solitary existence, it was perhaps the greatest discovery of all that protection, not predation, might be the ultimate evolutionary advantage.